September 18th, 1944. Lorraine, France. General Hasso von Manteuffel commanded the 113th Panzer Brigade equipped with 58 brand-new Panther tanks. Not refurbished, not battle-worn. Fresh from the factory with the best armour Germany could produce. The Panther was the deadliest tank on the Western Front. Sloped frontal armour that deflected American 75mm shells like rain off a roof. A high-velocity 75mm gun that could destroy Sherman tanks at ranges where the Sherman couldn't even scratch the Panther. Manteuffel's plan was textbook perfect, hit Patton's exposed right flank, cut off the 4th Armoured Division spearheads, destroy them before they could retreat, roll up the American advance and buy Germany weeks, maybe months. The mathematics favoured Germany completely. Superior tanks, experienced crews. Element of surprise. American supply lines stretched over 400 kilometres. Patton's forces overextended and vulnerable. 4 days later, 8 Panthers limped back to German lines. Out of 58. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. And what happened in those 4 days would reveal why Germany lost the war more clearly than any major battle ever did. The Panther tank was a masterpiece of German engineering. Sloped armour designed to deflect rather than absorb shells. A powerful gun that could penetrate American armour at 2,000 metres. Excellent optics, reliable mechanics when properly maintained. By every technical measure, it was superior to the American Sherman tank. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armour at combat ranges. A Panther could kill Shermans from distances where Shermans couldn't fight back. Manteuffel's calculations were based on this technological superiority. His logic followed traditional 1940s tank combat doctrine. Armour thickness plus gun caliber equals victory. More armour meant you could survive enemy fire. Better gun meant you killed enemies before they killed you. By this math, 58 Panthers should massacre any American force of comparable size. The Americans knew this too. They'd been losing the tank versus tank fight since encountering Panthers in Normandy. American tank crews called Panthers the tank that couldn't be killed from the front. Morale was impacted. Casualties were mounting. And now Manteuffel was bringing 58 fresh Panthers against Patton's overextended flank. On paper, the Americans were doomed. Except the battle wasn't fought on paper. September 18th dawned with heavy fog. Dense, thick fog that reduced visibility to less than 50 yards. Manteuffel's carefully planned long-range engagement became impossible. The Panthers' greatest advantage, the ability to kill at distance, disappeared. You can't shoot what you can't see. The fog turned the battlefield into a close-quarters brawl where range meant nothing. But it gets worse for the Germans. Panther tactics relied on formation coordination. Tanks advancing in mutually supporting groups, maintaining communication, concentrating fire. The fog destroyed all of that. German tank commanders couldn't see other tanks in their own formation. Radio communication became confused. The rigid, coordinated advance that German doctrine required became a blind stumble through soup. On the American side, Colonel Bruce Clark commanded the 37th Tank Battalion, including Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. They were waiting, and the fog that destroyed German advantages gave Americans something unexpected: equality. In close-quarters fog, it didn't matter that your gun couldn't penetrate at 2,000 metres, because nobody was shooting at 2,000 metres. They were shooting at 50 metres. And at 50 metres, American guns worked just fine against Panther-side armour. The M18 Hellcat was everything a tank destroyer shouldn't be according to German doctrine. It weighed 17 tons, lightly armoured, open-topped. A single hit from a Panther would destroy it instantly. German tanks were built as armoured fortresses, designed to take punishment and keep fighting. The Hellcat was the opposite. It had a 350 horsepower radial aircraft engine that pushed 17 tons to 55 miles per hour, faster than any tank on the battlefield, faster than most trucks. The Hellcat's doctrine was simple: shoot and scoot. Don't get hit. Don't exchange fire. Find position, ambush, kill and run before the enemy can respond. In the fog at Arracourt, this doctrine became devastating. Hellcat platoons positioned themselves using sound. They listened for the rumble of Panther engines. Heavy tanks make noise. Once they identified German approach routes, Hellcats repositioned rapidly to flanking positions. The Panthers advanced in formations designed for frontal engagement. Their strongest armour faced forward. Their sides were vulnerable, and the Hellcats were hitting them from the side. The engagement pattern was brutal. Hellcats would fire 3 or 4 rounds of 76mm into Panther side armour at close range, penetrations, kills. Then the Hellcats would accelerate to 55 miles per hour and disappear into the fog before German tanks could rotate turrets and return fire. The Germans were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't catch. By afternoon of the first day, the fog began lifting. The Germans thought their advantage was returning. Long-range visibility meant Panthers could use their superior guns again. Except the Americans had been waiting for this moment too. When the fog cleared, American artillery executed a tactic that would change warfare. Time on target. Traditional artillery worked like this. Battery 1 fires. Shells land. Battery 2 fires. Shells land. Sequential bombardment that gave enemies time to take cover after the first salvo. The Americans developed something different. A centralized fire direction center calculated precise firing times for multiple artillery batteries positioned at different distances and elevations. Each battery fired at a different time, calculated so that all shells would arrive at the target simultaneously. Dozens of batteries, hundreds of shells, all arriving in the same second. No warning, no first salvo to signal incoming fire. Just sudden, massive bombardment with no opportunity to take cover. Piper Cub spotter planes directed the fire with precise coordinates. The German Panzer Grenadiers, infantry supporting the tank advance, were caught in the open. Dozens of airburst shells exploded simultaneously overhead. The casualties were catastrophic, but worse than the dead infantry was what the artillery did to German communications. External radios and antennas on tanks were destroyed. Command and control evaporated. Tank commanders lost contact with each other and with higher command. The destruction of German infantry support was decisive. Tanks without infantry are blind. Infantry provides security, identifies threats, protects tanks from close assault teams. The American artillery barrage killed or scattered the Panzer Grenadiers, leaving the Panthers isolated. And isolated tanks in close terrain are vulnerable. American bazooka teams moved forward. The Panthers, already disoriented by fog and artillery, now faced infantry anti-tank weapons without their own infantry to screen them. Tank commanders had to button up, close all hatches and rely on limited vision blocks. Situational awareness collapsed. They couldn't see infantry sneaking close, couldn't coordinate with other tanks because radios were damaged, couldn't retreat effectively because they didn't know where friendly forces were. The Panthers became isolated metal boxes stumbling through hostile territory. Meanwhile, the Hellcats continued their ambush tactics: hit from the flank, kill, retreat at high speed, reposition, repeat. The Germans couldn't adapt because they couldn't communicate. By the end of the first day, 30 Panthers were destroyed or abandoned, 30, in less than 24 hours. American losses: 5 Shermans and 3 tank destroyers. The kill ratio wasn't just favourable, it was absurd. Day 2 brought new German problems. The 111th Panzer Brigade was supposed to reinforce Manteuffel's attack. 50 additional tanks that would overwhelm American defences through sheer numbers. The brigade ran out of fuel before reaching the battlefield, completely dry. The tanks stopped, were abandoned by their crews, and many were destroyed to prevent capture. This wasn't battlefield loss. This was logistical collapse. Fuel shortages had been plaguing German forces for months. Without fuel, the best tank in the world is a stationary target. The Americans had fuel problems too. Patton's supply lines were stretched. The Red Ball Express trucking system was working overtime. But the difference was that American fuel kept coming. Rationed, sometimes insufficient, but continuous. American tanks that ran dry could refuel and return to combat. German tanks that ran dry were abandoned. American logistics included another advantage: recovery and repair. Damaged Shermans were towed off the battlefield, repaired by mobile maintenance units, and returned to combat within hours or days. The Americans treated tanks as repairable equipment. The Germans, struggling with everything, often had to abandon damaged vehicles. A Sherman with a thrown track could be back in combat by evening. A Panther with similar damage might be lost permanently because recovery vehicles and spare parts weren't available. This created a mathematical impossibility for the Germans. They started with 58 Panthers, lost 30 on day 1, lost 20 more on day 2. Meanwhile, American tank strength actually increased as repaired vehicles returned and replacement tanks arrived from supply depots. By September 22nd, Manteuffel ordered retreat. The 113th Panzer Brigade was destroyed as an effective fighting force. 8 operational Panthers remained, 50 had been lost. The Americans had won decisively. But this victory revealed something more important than tactical success. It revealed why Germany was losing the war. The battle disproved fundamental assumptions about armoured warfare. Superior armour and gun calibre didn't guarantee victory. Visibility mattered. Communication mattered. Mobility mattered more than protection. Logistics mattered more than technology. The Panther was objectively superior to the Sherman in direct combat. But war isn't direct combat. It's systems. The American system, industrial production, supply chains, repair networks, artillery coordination, radio communication, was superior to German technical excellence in tank design. Manteuffel himself later acknowledged this. In post-war interviews, he admitted that American artillery tactics and tank destroyer mobility had rendered traditional panzer tactics obsolete. The Germans were fighting World War II with World War I concepts refined: concentrate armour, breakthrough, exploit. The Americans were fighting with integrated systems, tanks, artillery, air support, logistics, all coordinated through radio communication and centralized planning. The German approach relied on individual superiority. The American approach relied on systematic superiority. The outcome was inevitable once you understood this difference. The broader lesson from Arracourt is that industrial capacity determines wars more than battlefield courage. German soldiers were brave. German tanks were technically superior. German tactics were based on extensive experience. None of it mattered because Germany couldn't sustain operations. 58 Panthers sent to battle, 8 returned. Not because American tankers were better, because American industry could replace losses and Germany couldn't. Because American logistics could sustain operations and Germany couldn't. Because American artillery could coordinate fire and Germany couldn't match that capability. The metaphor is perfect. The Panther was a knight in shining armour. Impressive, deadly in single combat, but unable to function without the industrial base that produced, fueled, and supported it. The Sherman was a mass-produced tool, less impressive individually, but backed by factories that produced 50 Shermans for every Panther Germany built, backed by oil refineries that provided fuel when Germany was rationing to the point of paralysis, backed by a supply system that could deliver replacement tanks to the front while Germany struggled to get spare parts. The Battle of Arracourt was Germany losing the war in miniature, superior equipment failing because the system supporting it had collapsed. The outcome was never in doubt once you looked at production numbers, fuel availability, and logistics capacity. The battle just made it visible. Modern analysis of World War II often focuses on dramatic battles and heroic actions. D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, individual tank aces and fighter pilots. That's understandable. Those stories are compelling, but they miss the real story of why the Allies won. The Allies won because they outproduced the Axis. outsupplied them, outsustained them. The factory worker in Detroit building tanks mattered more than the tank ace in France. The logistics officer routing supply convoys mattered more than the infantry sergeant leading assaults. War is logistics, production, coordination. Everything else is details. Arracourt proved this conclusively. The Germans sent their best tank with experienced crews and tactical plans that should have worked. They lost because the American system was superior to German equipment, not in any individual component. The Panther was better than the Sherman. But the American system of production, supply, communication and coordination exceeded German capability. That's why 50 Panthers were destroyed in 4 days. That's why 8 came back. That's why Germany lost the war. Not because they lacked courage or skill, because they couldn't compete with Allied industrial and logistical capacity. The question isn't whether German soldiers fought well. They did. The question is whether fighting well matters when your tanks run out of fuel, your artillery lacks ammunition, and your replacements never arrive because the factories can't produce enough. The answer is no. The final irony is that Manteuffel was right in his assessment. The American flank was exposed. The tactical situation favoured a German attack. His plan was sound. If the battle had been fought in 1940 with 1940 logistics and technology, Germany might have won. But it was 1944. The Americans had developed integrated fire control systems. They had dedicated tank destroyers designed for mobility rather than armour. They had supply systems that could sustain operations despite stretched lines. They had artillery tactics that maximised lethality through coordination. And most importantly, they had industrial capacity that could replace losses faster than combat-destroyed equipment. Germany had none of this. The Panther tanks were excellent. Everything supporting them was failing. You can't win wars with excellent tanks when you lack fuel to run them, ammunition to fight with them, and replacements when they're destroyed. The Americans understood this. Their entire military doctrine was built around it. Don't build the best tank. Build a good tank that can be mass-produced, easily repaired, and adequately supplied. The Sherman wasn't the best tank. It was the right tank for industrial warfare. Reliable, repairable, replaceable. Those 3 R's mattered more than armour thickness or gun calibre. The Hellcat proved this even more clearly. Lightly armoured to the point of vulnerability, but so fast and manoeuvrable that armour didn't matter. Speed and mobility replaced protection. And it worked. 55 miles per hour meant Hellcats could engage and disengage at will. Panthers couldn't catch them, couldn't corner them, couldn't force engagement on favourable terms. The Hellcat embodied American doctrine: don't fight fair, fight smart, use advantages the enemy can't counter. The soldiers who fought at Arracourt understood what was happening even if they couldn't articulate it fully. American tank crews knew their Shermans were outmatched by Panthers in direct combat. They'd seen too many Shermans knocked out by long-range Panther fire. But they also knew that battles aren't just about tank versus tank duels. They had artillery support the Germans couldn't match. They had air support when weather allowed. They had fuel that kept arriving. They had replacement tanks when losses mounted. They trusted the system. German tank crews knew their Panthers were superior machines. But they also knew they were fighting with inadequate fuel, limited ammunition, no prospect of reinforcements, and constant pressure from American forces that seemed to have unlimited resources. The psychological impact of this disparity was significant. American morale stayed high because soldiers believed they would be supported. German morale declined because soldiers knew they were fighting a losing battle, regardless of tactical success. Arracourt crystallized this. Even with the best tanks Germany could field, fighting on tactically favourable ground with experienced crews and sound planning, they lost decisively. What hope did that leave for future battles? 58 Panthers. 8 came back. The numbers tell the story more clearly than any narrative. That's an 86% loss rate in 4 days. Unsustainable by any measure. If Germany suffered those losses across all formations, the Wehrmacht would cease to exist within weeks. The Americans could sustain their losses because replacement tanks were already in production and en route. Germany couldn't replace the Panthers, couldn't train new crews fast enough, couldn't provide fuel for the tanks they did have. The battle revealed the fundamental arithmetic of the war. America could afford losses, Germany couldn't. That arithmetic, not individual battles or tactical brilliance, determined the outcome. The question posed to viewers is genuine. Would you rather command a Panther or a Hellcat? The Panther offers protection and firepower. The Hellcat offers speed and mobility. In isolation, the Panther seems superior. In the actual context of industrial warfare with integrated systems, the Hellcat was more effective. It survived. It killed. It accomplished the mission. The Panther, for all its impressive specifications, ended up burning on French battlefields because the systems supporting it failed. That's the lesson of Arracourt. Individual excellence doesn't overcome systematic failure. Wars are won by systems. The side with better production, supply, communication, and coordination wins. Everything else is tactics, and tactics can't overcome strategic reality. Germany's strategic reality in September 1944 was collapse. 50 Panthers destroyed in 4 days just made it visible.